All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Deconversion Stories. Today, I'm talking to my friend Lloyd Evans from across the pond over in England. Jolly old England, as they say.
It's a pleasure to be here on the moon with you, overlooking the Earth.
That's right. That's right.
Gives you a new perspective on things, I think.
I think so. Take that, flat earthers. As you can see from here, we are proving that the Earth is a oblate spheroid, as they say.
Indeed.
All right, looks like we've got X-Cult Baby, we've got David Worley, we got Roman, we got lots of people in the audience. Welcome, everyone. I hope you guys enjoy our conversation. And Lloyd, usually what I do here with people is I talk to them about their journeys away from their previous faiths, and the road that took them on, the ups, the downs, the disappointments, that kind of thing. Hey, Prophet, I just thought I'd share this with you. There you go, Piaz. I got your shirt on right here.
I've done some work for his videos. I played the narrator, I think, for one or two of his videos. So,
yeah, I got to do a voice in a couple of his, which was a lot of fun. Hopefully, I can do more in the coming months. Anyways, Lloyd, so take us back to you're an ex-JW, as we all know, I think. So. Take us on that journey from that first domino that fell, that led you into becoming the atheist activist that you are today.
Well, I suppose the domino started falling long before I could get out and before I was in a position to break free. I was actually sort of 19, 20 when I first started realizing that the publications didn't make sense. I describe in my book bringing home a new publication from a convention. It was called Pay Attention to Daniel's Prophecy, and it was an explanation of the Bible book of Daniel from a JW perspective, basically putting an interpretation on more or less everything that's mentioned in that book. And a number of the interpretations just didn't make any sense whatsoever. And I was so terrified because this was the first time that I kind of consciously disagreed with something that was coming to me from God's one and only faithful slave, God's approved channel of communicating with mankind. So I was so terrified at the thought of writing anything in the book, in my notes, that might be construed as apostasy, that rather than write, I disagree with this, I just folded the page. And I ended up folding, I think, 4 or 5 different pages.
Wow.
Yeah, because and this was a huge thing. I mean, to begin doubting your religion as a Jehovah's Witness, yeah, it's a big thing. And what happened, long story short, is that my mother died when I was 21, and so even though I had lots of doubts, I put them all to one side. There's a song in the Book of Mormon musical called "Turn It Off."
Yes.
That can be just switched straight across to Jehovah's Witnesses, because the lyrics are entirely what you have to do as a Jehovah's Witness. If you have any doubts, you're supposed to wait on Jehovah. So just basically pretend your doubts don't exist and hope that one day everything will make sense. So that was the game I indulged in. And apart from anything else, I was convinced that only through being a good Jehovah's Witness would I see my mother again. And then it wasn't until I was an elder and I was 29, 30 years old, and my wife and I moved to Croatia because my wife is Croatian. It was that process of moving to a different country where suddenly everyone was speaking a different language and I couldn't understand what people were saying. Excuse me. So basically the language barrier facilitated my returning to those doubts, and I was sat there in the Kingdom Hall not understanding a word that was being spoken, and this gave me just a breathing space to think, hang on a minute, what do I believe? Do I really believe this? And it took only a few months for me to actually write my wife a letter and say, I think I'm going to end up leaving, this is really serious. So
she was Jehovah's as well?
Yeah, she was definitely a Jehovah's Witness. She was about a year behind me in waking up. And that was a very painful process to begin with, because, when when you're in that situation and you've got a spouse, immediately you start thinking, well, is this the end of our marriage? Because in some cases it is, of course.
Yeah.
The other partner wants to stay behind. So fortunately for me, I was able to, through some very discreet conversations, just kind of make her realize that this wasn't some kind of ruse on my part. I was genuinely struggling. And when she tried to come up with the answers herself, she couldn't. And so, yeah, that's how it all started, really.
Now, I guess you grew up in it, and I'm assuming that she did as well.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I've talked to a few Jehovah's Witnesses, even in my day-to-day life, and none of them, not that we choose our beliefs, but none of them really chose to be in it. They were all raised in it.
Yeah.
I've never really met anyone that ended up in the Jehovah's Witness kingdom, right?
So that's because it's a load of bollocks.
Well, that aside, I've noticed people become Christians. I've noticed people convert to Judaism, but I've never heard of anyone, quote unquote, converting to the Jehovah's Witness faith.
No, that's you raise a very good point, and this is something I actually address in my book. I talk about the fact that these days, in order to make a Jehovah's Witness, what you need to do is intercept their upbringing. You need to hijack their developmental process as early as possible and indoctrinate them into believing what is otherwise nonsensical views and explanations about the Bible. This is actually, you can actually take the figures that are published by Jehovah's Witnesses, because they publish very extensive figures every year on membership, and you can compare them with, for example, poverty metrics or the availability of the internet in various countries, and you very quickly realize that in countries that are developed and where the internet is widely available, growth is stagnant for Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, in some countries it started to go into reverse. So last year Canada posted a decline actually in Jehovah's Witnesses, whereas in countries that are still developing, that where there is lots of poverty and where the internet isn't widely available, growth is disproportionately higher. So Jehovah's Witnesses very much prey upon, you might say, ignorance and misery in drilling their message home.
Wow. Now you've got a website for people to share their experiences, right? Was it the JW survey, I think?
Yeah, so one of the things I was very interested in doing when I first started waking up was kind of finding out how many of me there were out there, how many other people kind of were doubting or beginning to doubt. And there were obviously forums, and still are forums available, and quite a large community of ex-witnesses on places like Reddit and Facebook and that kind of thing. But I kind of wanted to know at a glance what people's views were and what people's experiences were, and I thought a good way of doing that was to start a survey. So I got together with another ex-witness, and we built a website called jwsurvey.org, which kind of became a community in itself, in a way, where people could go on there and they could take the survey and see at a glance how people feel. And also we post blog articles on the latest developments, with particularly with child sex abuse. We're keeping an eye on that at the moment. So we try and make it a one-stop resource to the extent possible for those who are beginning to doubt.
I've heard recently, actually, you meant the child abuse sort of thing. I've heard recently that they're now discovering that these types of things that they're finding within the Catholic papacy to be happening in other religious groups as well. Do you remember yourself ever hearing of or dealing with problems like that within your own fellowship and stuff like that?
I don't remember it when I was inside. I was an elder for only a year, so that didn't give me much time to kind of learn of cases, because only when you're an elder do you basically have access to that sort of level of information. If you're only a servant or lower than a servant, you're just not going to hear, because of the way it's all set up, if there is a case in your congregation. I do remember very vividly there was a BBC documentary when I was still a witness that was exposing it all, and that was in 2002.
Oh,
And I
wow.
actually read a letter out at all the Kingdom Halls on the Sunday morning before the documentary, which is unheard of. They usually read letters out in the midweek, not on the Sunday.
Right.
Basically giving a counter narrative and trying to prep witnesses and say, oh, all of this is, unfair and it's Satan and we do everything properly and that kind of thing. And of course, all it made you want to do was watch it. So I watched it and was initially very, very shocked at what I was seeing. But almost immediately as the end credits are rolling, you're starting to try to make justifications in your head. And when you absolutely fervently believe it, and when you absolutely need it to be God's one and only true organization, you quickly start making excuses such as, oh, it's just a few
Sure.
bad apples. Why would we judge an entire organization based on one or two individuals, etc., etc.? It's only when you get out and take the time to do the research and ask the honest questions that you realize that this is not about a few bad apples. This is about lots of bad policies that have been put in place by the leaders that are putting children at risk. So that's now become, I would say, a major part of my work. And next month, I'm going to be actually appearing as a core participant for ICSA in England and Wales. It's the Inquiry into Institutional Child Sex Abuse.
Wow.
And I'm going to be basically giving evidence to them about the whole issue of Jehovah's Witnesses and child sex abuse, which will be interesting. But yeah, there's definitely something there. And when you compare it with Catholicism, I mean, I'm not overly briefed on how it works with Catholicism, but I know that for the most part, Catholicism is about moving priests around. So
Yeah.
they learn about a priest in one parish, and to try and cover it up, they just send them to another one. With Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not necessarily just about the priests or the elders. It's about everyone, how everyone is dealt with. So if an ordinary congregant is discovered to be an abuser, how do you deal with them? Well, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, you keep things buried. You cover them up as much as possible. So it's a very big problem.
That seems kind of does nobody else in the community want these things to be known so that they can sort of weed out the, quote, as you put it, bad apples?
I have my own theory as to why they're not doing the obvious thing, because frankly, we're talking about a situation that has been an ongoing source of bad publicity for the organization for, let me think, we're now in 2020. So it's been rumbling on now for about 18 or more years since this first came to light. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it's getting worse in terms of the exposure and in terms of the lawsuits. I have my own theories as to why they haven't just decided, look, let's just do whatever people are telling us to do. And if that means reporting all child abusers, we'll report all child abusers. I think the reason why they're not doing it, frankly, is because this issue goes right to the very top. And if they were to...
You mean God?
Not quite that far.
Right.
You're assuming this is God's organization. No,
right.
To the governing body, I think that I'm not yet in a position to prove it. Hopefully one day I will be, because it's just a case of finding the right documents. But
Sure.
I have very strong reason to believe that a former governing body member was accused of pedophilia. And so my theory is that if they start divulging all of their records, and we're talking about a database with tens of thousands of names on it, if they were to turn all these records over to law enforcement, one of those names would be instantly recognizable and would call into question the entire premise of the governing body being individuals who are chosen to be God's channel of spiritual food with mankind. So it raises all sorts of theological issues as well. And I think that's the main reason why they are burying child sex abuse.
Should have just had a question in my mind, and of course my brain isn't functioning properly yet because I've only had one cup of coffee. shit. Now, the blank spaces.
I'll take over from here. It's okay. So, viewers, we have a few comments coming in on the live chat, and
yeah. I'll address some of those, of course.
Yeah.
Just make sure you guys tag me if you do want, and we will be having an after party afterwards. And if you do have questions you want, you can be involved and ask Lloyd yourself. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, on your way out of this, what kind of an effect? Like, did you lose any family members, friends? Like, did you sort of have to sort of start from ground zero, sort of thing?
Well, yes, because you are shunned when you leave this organization. This is an organization that actively punishes people for leaving, for deciding they no longer agree with the leadership. So they publish very manipulative videos, and they publish materials convincing even family members to cut off all ties. They tell Jehovah's Witnesses not even to email disfellowshipped family members, and to avoid basically all contact with them. So I am not being shunned by all of my JW family members for various reasons that I won't go into, but I am very much being shunned by my father and sister. And so, for example, my father, who is an elder, hasn't met both of my children yet, because they were both born after he started shunning me. So that's just for me, that's one of the things I most struggle with, because when you become a parent and you experience that very, very fierce bond of affection for your child, you can never imagine just dropping it and just forgetting how you feel. But that's what you're required to do, of course, as a Jehovah's Witness. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to expose cults, because the damaging things that they make people do kind of negate the control that they have over people. Is so powerful that it makes people negate their own humanity, and that's a very slippery slope to go down. So yeah, it's if there is a fire in my belly that kind of produces the work that I do, probably for a large part it's the fact that I'm still experiencing punishment radiating out from this vile cult years after I've left, through the form of shunning.
Yeah, as you can see, it's happened to others as well, obviously. Yeah. But I often wonder if, I know that it's sort of the rules will say that if somebody in your family drops out, you're to shun them. But I often wonder, as you said, when you have a child and that connection that you build and the love that you have for the child, I wonder if it's still there, but they have to do this for appearances. I would imagine it would be.
I'm sure that it completely tears people up. And I've heard, every now and then I'll get someone who knows my dad kind of report back to me. It's inevitable. He would like to think, I'm sure, that everyone he comes across is sympathetic to his plight, but that's just simply not true. Because there's lots of people in the Jehovah's Witness religion who are waking up, and sometimes it's a very slow process, but because of the nature of the religion, you have to keep up appearances. So some of these people come into contact with my dad and they report back to me and they say, look, he's a mess. He's a shell of a man. That was one thing I heard said.
Right.
And I feel bad for him, but at the same time, again, I just think how I feel about my children, and nothing in the world would come between me and them. Right. And actually, the rules allow him to speak to me. It's just that if he were to speak to me, he would no longer be what's called exemplary. So you can actually have contact. In other words, you're not disfellowshipped if it's a family member. You are disfellowshipped for what's called brazen conduct if you have contact with a disfellowshipped non-family member. But if you're related to them, or if it's a close family member, you're not disfellowshipped, but you're no longer exemplary. And that tells me that being an elder in his congregation is more important to him at this point in his life than knowing his grandchildren and spending time with his son and daughter-in-law. So fair enough. If that's the decision he's made, I obviously accept that at least to some extent he's being coerced, and I remember
Sure.
what that felt like. But my sympathy has its limits.
Well, I mean, in the scriptures itself, it says that you are to worship, God or Jesus above family. I'm saying it, of course, in some layman's terms, but
Yeah, it doesn't say to shun though.
No,
In fact, there's an interesting parable, the parable of the prodigal son, of course, and I've referred to this a few times on my channel. Well-known story. The son goes off and leads a life of debauchery, and spends all his inheritance to the point where he's in absolute destitution, and then thinks, well, hang on, here I am lying in a load of pig's will. At the very least, I could go back and offer to work for my dad. I'm sure he'd at least let me work for him. And then he returns, not because he's sorry, but because he's run out of money. And the Bible verse says, while he was still a long way off. So in other words, no attempt to find out whether he was repentant or not. The father ran to him and embraced him. So right in the teachings of Jesus, you have very much an anti-shunning story, a story that says, your blood ties come first, and if your son comes back, you bloody well run and embrace that boy,
Yeah.
So that's one of a number of verses that I've pointed to in past videos. Not that I'm necessarily seeking to stand up for the Bible, because obviously I'm an atheist. It's just by happy coincidence, lots of the things that witnesses do and seek to justify using the Bible actually cannot be justified in the Bible on closer inspection.
Sure. Right. So what do you think they came up with this idea of shunning?
I don't think, I know. They came up with it in 1952. And what's interesting is that in 1947, obviously you'll be aware that their magazines are called Watchtower and Awake. And there's an Awake article from 1947 titled, Are You Also Excommunicated?, in which it blasts the Catholic Church for excommunication and says that it's a pagan practice, not based on the Bible, and it's an instrument of control and cruelty, basically. And only a few years later, in 1952, they thought, actually, it would work quite well for us. So in 1952, they started disfellowshipping people. And then later in 1981, they made it so that there wasn't even a way to resign from the organization without being treated as though you had committed a sin. So,
wow. That's it boggles my mind to think that somebody would actually want to think that way. Like you'd want to think that you wouldn't want to excommunicate or shun people. You'd want to try and reel them back in. Right? Like that would make more sense, especially as you were talking about earlier, today's numbers to show that these belief systems are now into decline. You'd think that they'd want to get rid of that and pull people back into the flock, so to speak, or to the fellowship.
Look, it really speaks to the narcissism for me. And what's interesting is that, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't the only group that do this. The Amish do it. The Westboro Baptists do it. Scientology has disconnection.
Oh, yeah.
My theory is that it's almost an example of convergent evolution. In other words, even though it's not necessarily a conscious process to steer the organization in this very cruel, evil direction, it's just over many, many years and through successive leaders, a single aim, which is to put the organization above everything, gradually gives birth to all of these harmful practices, which, because they work so well, end up being more or less identical in various different groups, even with very different beliefs. So,
wow. Through the time after you were excommunicated or disfellowshipped, were any of your friends from within, did they ever talk to you or come to see you sort of outside of that, hopefully that nobody would catch them or anything like that, and that they wouldn't be penalized?
That's been one source of sadness for me. I mentioned earlier that every now and then I get reports about my dad, but it's very rarely from people that I knew very well. One of the things that I'm most sad about, given the fact that, according to at least to the emails I get and the comments I get on YouTube, I'm apparently responsible for lots of people, or at least I've helped apparently lots of people come to the realization that it's a cult and they've managed to get out. But
that's great.
Not so much people that I actually knew. And I kind of think, well, gosh, why can't I get like at least 20, who I was close to? Because I knew hundreds of people when I was a Jehovah's Witness. I was quite the social butterfly.
I could see that.
Thank you. But yeah, it's strange. It's a strange thing. I think that it's a very complicated thing as well to actually get out. And like, I released a book called How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses, and there it is. Quick plug. And
absolutely.
one of the criticisms, if you like, that I got was, well, just leave. You don't need to write a book about it. But unfortunately, it's really not that simple. That there are things that you can do wrong, and there is such a thing. We have our own parlance in the XJW world of POMI and PIMO. So POMI is physically out, mentally in. PIMO is physically in, mentally out, and all the various other variations. And I think that it's possible, for example, to be disfellowshipped from Jehovah's Witnesses and stop attending meetings, but carry on believing in the indoctrination for years or even decades later. I've had comments from people who've said, look, I was disfellowshipped decades ago, and I've literally, in the last few weeks, stumbled on your videos, and now I've stopped hating myself.
Wow.
Now I've stopped thinking that Armageddon is going to come and destroy me. So it really is a very pernicious ideology that has people by the scruff of the neck. So I'm sure that there are lots of people that I knew who are no longer witnesses, but that doesn't in itself mean that they're in a situation in life where they can reach out to me.
Yeah, I've actually spoken to one person that had to keep themselves completely concealed. Nobody really knows who this person is. We know him as Not Your Witness, but he can't come out yet because he's still sort of within the fabric,
exactly.
The framework.
And doesn't
right?
that say everything about the organization? We have one of the team on JW Survey, and he's also on our Watchtower in Focus episodes. It's called Covert Fade. I've been working with him now for years. Nobody knows what his real name is, and he's been having to work undercover with his identity concealed whenever we do videos with him, precisely because if his identity were figured out, it's potentially game over for his relationship with his parents, and he wants to hold on to that relationship and has a right to hold on to that relationship, and it's a case of making the best of a bad situation. And for some people that works. For me it didn't, but I certainly don't begrudge anyone who tries to keep the best of both worlds to the extent possible. Right.
Yeah, I was going to say it must have been a struggle for you knowing that could possibly happen when you sort of started finding your way out of there. Because I personally, I could never imagine not having my family around, even though I'm an ex-Jew. So I grew up in the Jewish faith, which is weird because I was born to Christians, given up for adoption, and then raised as a Jew. And then, of course, I got out of that quite early on, 1920-ish, and then got into the whole paganism thing, and eventually went, all this stuff is fucking bullshit. I'm out of here. So became the self-proclaimed atheist that I am today. But but I think, and you've pointed out in our chat already that you've had people that have been getting in touch with you saying that your content has helped them. And I'm starting to get some of the similar emails and messages about, I've watched some of your shows and I feel so much better about things because I know that there are people that have made it all the way through and are now in a better place. And that's got to be gratifying. At least it has been for me. It's got to make you feel a little bit good about what you're doing, right?
Oh, definitely. And it's even more amazing when you get to meet them in person. We were talking just before we came on about the Faithless Forum, and it's quite an emotional experience actually when you're coming face to face with people. It's one thing to read the messages, but when they're actually in front of you, it's something else. It really is.
Right. There you go. You see, we're seeing it already here.
Eric. Yeah, there's a familiar name. Brilliant. But just going back to, if I may, what you were saying before about shunning, I just think that, in a way, if you think about it, it's a bit like emotional waterboarding, because waterboarding basically plays on the human instinct to avoid drowning, and it's a very primal thing. If you feel you're drowning, you immediately do whatever you can to get out of that situation.
Sure.
Ostracism works in a similar way. It literally hurts, and the reason why it hurts is because, from an evolutionary point of view, you're in a bad position if all of a sudden your tribe abandons you. I mean, you're on the savannah as an early human, and your tribe abandons you, you're dead.
Yeah, pretty much.
You can patch things up with your tribe, or find another tribe, either of which requires urgent action, which is why you need the pain. And so that's why it's very evil, if you think about it, for groups to use what is essentially a survival instinct against people. And it works in so many cases. In fact, Jehovah's Witnesses make no secret of the fact that, a main reason for shunning is to motivate people to reestablish ties with their family. Not to consider whether it's true or not. Nothing to do with that. No, we want to, emotionally blackmail people into coming back. It's really, really evil.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's not about whether or not it's true. They already presuppose that it is, right? Yeah. So it's going to be about, as you were saying, like, encouraging people to come back. By shunning them, they're probably thinking, well, if we kick their asses out of here, maybe they're going to want to go, oh shit, did I screw up, and want to come back, right?
Indeed.
But that's most of the time, I don't think that that's how it ends up working for them, because we have ex-cult baby who's in the chat as well, another ex-Jehovah's Witness. She didn't return. Neither did my friend.
I'm looking forward to meeting them actually in June. That'd be fantastic. Yeah,
for sure. Well, I met her last year. She didn't know who I was. That's okay. Nobody really did at that point. Which I think is part of the reason why I went down there, just to get to meet some of the people that I've been admiring, watching for years. Right. I'll be honest, I thought you were going to be there last year, because I don't know where I'd heard it, but they had said that you might be out there. So
yeah, it was a bit of I couldn't jump on it when it first was announced, and then by the time I could jump on it, I think they'd already arranged everything, which is perfectly understandable.
Sure.
I feel bad for having missed the first two, and I think there's no excuses for missing the third. So I'm very much looking for, and I had a lovely time as well in November when I was in Austin.
Yeah.
So it'll be great to get reacquainted with some of the friends I made when I was there in November. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, guys, if you haven't seen Lloyd co-host some of the shows there, definitely go back to the November parts of their menus and check out the shows he was on. I saw them all pretty much when they aired, or the day after anyways, because a lot of times I'm pretty busy on weekends. So a lot of times I'll watch the Truth Wanteds and the Atheist Experience on the Monday when I'm at work in the lab, right? And then I could just listen to it in the background. So
it was a surreal experience. I remember thinking, I've never done anything like that before. I'm probably going to completely suck at it. And I tried watching some episodes to kind of swat up, because I like to prepare for things.
Sure.
But of course, when you're watching old episodes, all you're doing is listening into someone else's conversation. And by the time you're thinking, well, how would I reply to that? They've already replied with something completely different, and you're just being swept along. So it was all kind of like going into a dark, scary place, but I emerged kind of quite enjoying it. And obviously Matt was very gracious, as were the other hosts. So it was a lovely experience.
Well, yeah, because I met all of them last year, and Matt was he's a pretty cool guy, man. I got to admit that.
He's brilliant, yeah.
This is funny right here.
I wish I could get communicated from the Catholic Church. They keep sending me mail for money. Gosh. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Joseph. I'm sorry.
That's going to be irritating.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay.
Oh yeah, I was on that.
Talk a little bit about that. Like, I think I missed that, to be honest.
Yeah, it was quite an amazing experience. Obviously, I knew Leah's work and followed. I've always been quite fascinated by Scientology, and in fact, it was reading the book Going Clear before the documentary came out. Reading the book Going Clear by Larry Wright was hugely helpful for me when I was going through the process of figuring out, what the hell had happened to me. And so I've always kind of kept tabs on what's happening in the Scientology world, and kind of learned that they were interested in doing Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was reached out to by a producer for a different show that I didn't end up being on, but through that, basically, I got connected with Leah. Actually, Leah reached out to me on Twitter. It was quite surreal. I came to my computer one morning and it said, new follower, Leah Remini. I'm like, what? And she'd left a message as well to get in touch with her. So we had a phone conversation, and yeah, she needed help with a special on Jehovah's Witnesses, which we ended up filming in 2018. I think it was around May or thereabouts, and it ended up going up on in November 2018. It was a special, I think 2-hour special on Jehovah's Witnesses for the aftermath. And yeah, it basically, it does go through a number of different areas. So it deals with blood, for example, the blood transfusions issue. It deals with shunning, deals with suicide, child sex abuse, a range of subjects, really. And I was very, very thrilled to be involved in that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to have to search that out now because I don't think I saw that.
No.
I am a dedicated blood donor myself. My father, Frank, was my province's highest donor before he passed away. He did over 532 donations. So when he passed away, I decided that we'd always talked for years about getting together to go and donate blood. But of course, my schedule and his schedule fucking conflicted for as long as I can remember. So it never came to fruition. So I decided, all right, I have to do something now. He's gone, so somebody's got to replace him. And of course, I don't have O negative blood. I'm O positive. He was O negative, so he's universal and he could donate to anybody. So I decided, all right, I'm going to start a Partners for Life group, which is what we have here in Canada for Canadian Blood Services. You can start a group of dedicated donors that go every once a month, and you build up your numbers of donations. And when I went in there to start this up, I was speaking to the people at Canadian Blood Services, letting them know I wanted to do this. And they thought, oh, that's a great idea. You'll have to give us a pledge of how many you think you can do. And I said, oh, I could probably break my dad's numbers in the first year. And they kind of looked at each other like I was from Mars or something. I said, that's never happened in Canadian history. I highly doubt you'll be able to do something like that. And I'm just kind of under my breath. I'm like, yeah, you guys haven't dealt with someone like me yet, because I kind of get in people's faces all the time. So I'm pretty serious about this. And she goes, well, how about we just do a nice conservative number, like 50? We'll say 50 for the year. I go, well, you can write that down. But I'm telling you right now, at the end of this year, we're going to shatter that number. And sure shit, I got close to 200 people into the group the first year, with a few news spots, because I have some friends that are in the business and stuff. So I was able to get on Global News, and I was able to get on CTV News. And
it was a bloodbath.
It was a bloodbath, right?
It was a carnage.
Well, it turned out being that way, because we ended up with over 680 donations in the first year.
Fantastic.
That's 1,240% higher than my initial pledge that they recommended. So I've gone down now in Canadian history as being the first single person to start a group like that with that many numbers, which is pretty done. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that fact. And I always reiterate that every time I have one of these shows, if I get the opportunity to do so, because I try and encourage people to do it as well. And I get a lot of people sending me messages with their pictures of the needles in their arm and stuff. Hey, I'm doing it, right? Which is great. And I always encourage that kind of thing.
Fantastic.
Now, the reason I bring this up is because of the blood thing with the Jehovah's Witnesses. And as far as I know, and I've discussed this, I did a collab with Not Your Witness, actually, about the whole blood thing. And as far as he's telling me, There really isn't anything in the scriptures that says you can't do it. So I kind of want to get your take on where they came up with this idea.
I wouldn't say that there's nothing in the Bible, because there are verses that say don't abstain from blood, basically. So
Really?
in the Mosaic law, Israelites weren't allowed to eat blood, although there's at least one example of people in an emergency situation eating blood and not being punished. So that's worth noting. But the command against eating blood got carried over to the New Testament in the book of Acts, where Paul says, among other things, to keep abstaining from blood. Now, clearly, when he says abstain from blood, he's not talking about abstain from the medical use of blood. He's talking about don't eat the stuff. And there's a huge difference between eating blood and having it transfused into your body. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses would argue otherwise. They would say, if you're not allowed to eat the stuff, then you're most certainly not allowed to have it injected into you. But they are ignoring the fact that, again, blood performs an entirely different function in your circulatory system than it performs in your stomach. And also, witnesses overlook the rabbinic principle of piquach nefesh. If you think about a community of religious people who are very, very zealous about applying the very last letter of what's in the Old Testament, you would probably think of Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews have no problem whatsoever with receiving blood transfusions because of the principle of piquach nefesh, which basically put means life comes first. And so in the New Testament, when Jesus is arguing with the religious leaders of his day about the Sabbath, and he's saying, well, if your bull falls into a hole on the Sabbath, you're sure as hell going to put some work in to get that out, aren't you? So if you're going to save the life of a bull, why shouldn't I be able to heal someone? That was the kind of argument he would make.
Right.
He was appealing to piquach nefesh. Now, because the Jehovah's Witness leadership aren't Bible scholars, they don't know that. So at some point in 1945, we don't quite know who it was, but almost certainly Nathan Knorr and Fred Franz, Nathan Knorr being the president, Fred Franz being the architect of the religion's teachings, more or less, got together and thought, well, hey, how can we make our religion more different? How can we mix things up a bit? I know, let's ban blood transfusions. And so since introducing that rule, it's been estimated that tens of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses have died. It's even more tragic when we're talking about children, because, of course, children are in no position whatsoever to be making decisions about what their religious beliefs will be when they're adults. And yet they have this decision made, in many cases, for them on their behalf by their believing parents. Thankfully, court judges are starting to clamp down on that sort of thing, but it's a bit too late for the many who have already died. And in fact, in a recent, I think it was the August JW Broadcasting episode, some will be familiar with the fact that I do rebuttals to these things. They actually celebrate the martyrdom of one young lad called Jared Scepter, who would have been my age, actually, if not for the fact that when he got ill and he was around 10 or 11, his parents denied him a blood transfusion. And, you know, decades later, there they are on a highly polished piece of cult propaganda, basically getting a pat on the back for doing so.
Oh, that's... I'm sorry, but that just boils my blood. I think of something like that, and then I reflect upon a story that my dad told me. He was, because he was a platelet donor as well, he was always on call in case they needed him. And he was Jewish, and he got a call about 2:33 in the morning to go to the hospital right away because they needed his O negative blood. They were completely out of stock. Or at least I think they had accidentally sent the last of some to Alberta for some emergency thing, and they required him to go there. And they literally put him on the bed beside the patient, who was a devout Muslim. All right. and a Jew. They don't exactly, they're kind of like oil and water. They don't really get along. And he, no problem, he said, he went there and he got hooked up right to the guy. And the Muslim fellow just looked over and he's like, I can't believe this is happening. Because of the differences that they're so used to, battling back and forth. For thousands of years, it's been going on. So, well, for however long.
But this is what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
These groups have a way of overriding humanity. It's just the obvious thing to do. If someone's life's in danger and there's a means of saving it, for goodness sake, save it.
Yeah.
And same thing with shunning. But unfortunately, when you introduce religious fundamentalism into the mix, and particularly the need to put the organization first, these things just get totally messed up.
Oh, yeah, you're not kidding. Yeah, but I think it's a fine example of my dad doing that to demonstrate that you can put all that bullshit aside and just go save somebody's life.
Indeed.
Right? So, okay, so what made you decide to want to start a YouTube channel? Obviously to help people, but I mean, do you have any more detail on, like, were you watching people and you said, you know what, I could do this and I can help people, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting, really. I was obviously following one or two on YouTube, and I wasn't a massive devourer of YouTube content. I just found one or two videos interesting, but I wasn't really massively into it. And I was also, of course, at the time, still undercover. So I was under the pseudonym John Cedars, which is why the channel is called what it's called. So I had a pseudonym and I had a cartoon that I would show if I was showing an image, so people couldn't see what I looked like. And I was writing blog articles. That was the main thing for me, was writing blog articles. I was really a writer rather than I was a YouTuber. And my colleague who set up the website with me, there was a big story involving child sex abuse in 2012 when Candace Conti initially won a big jury victory against Watchtower. And my friend John just said to me, there aren't really any YouTube videos about this, Lloyd. You're good at making videos. Why don't you make one? So I was like, okay, fair enough. So I basically put together a video, and I wrote the script for it, but I got someone else to read the script so that no one could tell that I was attached to it. And I basically just made a montage of different, imagery while this monologue was unfolding. And that was, I think, if not my first, certainly one of my first videos was that. And so that was my first foray into YouTube. And I guess I got the hang of it more, and I quite enjoyed the reaction when I'd upload a video. And then in November 2013, my wife and I decided that we were going to fully disassociate because our first child was on its way. And we kind of decided that we wanted to completely draw a line under our involvement in the religion. And more than anything, we didn't want to give our believing family members any reason to think that they had a right to indoctrinate our child. So it was very much a case of, we're drawing a line here and we don't want to be associated as witnesses anymore. And this gave me the freedom to upload my first ever vlog where I appeared, on camera. That was in November 2013. And it just kind of snowballed from there, really. It was just, I think when you do your first one and you're frankly like a rabbit in the headlights, I watch the first one now and I can see how nervous I was and how unaccustomed to the whole thing I was.
Right.
You just stick at it, don't you? And then after a while, you just kind of sink into the role, don't you, of speaking into a piece of glass and
pretty much
uploading the result to YouTube. You just get used to it, yeah.
I'm pretty lucky because I have done that type of video too for my other channel, which is involved like gaming and stuff like that, where I just speak to the camera and then upload whatever the games that I did that day or whatever. And I've been lucky on this front where I've started this channel where I talk to people about how and why they left and stuff like that, because I actually get to talk to someone, right? I get the discourse with someone rather than just talking to a camera lens. And I think I prefer this over the other one. Although you can, because sometimes I think doing it the other way, you can just get carried away with stuff and you don't really realize what you're doing. And then you watch back your filming and you're like, holy shit, did I really say that or something like that? And then of course you can edit it out. But
well, live streaming has kind of been I think you have to adapt, don't you? And live streaming has just been something I've had to adapt to. And to begin with, I was very skeptical about it. I was like, when would I ever possibly need to do this? And it's just become more and more necessary to do live streams. And of course, the good thing about them is that you don't need to worry about editing. And if anything, the immediacy of it and the urgency of it forces you to make less mistakes, because when it's not being live streamed, you inevitably are more casual in front of the camera because you think, well, it's all going to get edited anyway, so who cares? But when you're live streaming it all, it makes you step up to the plate.
I think so.
Sorry, someone's just said it wasn't Paul. Mark M has made a comment. It wasn't Paul who issued the edict, so I happily take that correction. I always think Axe and think Paul, but it's not necessarily Paul. So thank you for that correction.
There you go. Yeah, you leave it to the people watching to give us the corrections necessary.
You see, 604 Atheist has the creme de la creme of viewers. And
sure.
They really know their Bibles quite clearly.
Actually, you know who I do get dropping in, especially in the after parties, is you're familiar with Darth Dawkins? Like Shannon Q just did a thing with him.
Do you mean Richard Dawkins?
No, Darth Dawkins is this guy's handle.
Dawkins.
Okay.
No. I've not had that pleasure.
He jumps into streams. He's like, come and debate me, boy.
That kind of thing. Does he jump in with a red lightsaber? Because that might be messy. You might need quite a few blood transfusions after it.
Probably. I think he has his original icon was somebody with a red lightsaber, but
okay.
That was a long time ago. But he's been taken down so many times it just starts sending in his troops.
Oh, really?
To go and try. There's like 4 or 5. Yeah. Calling me a chicken. And it's like, dude, I don't debate people. All right. If he wants to come on and just have a conversation, that's is one thing. But any conversations with that guy, what he does is he tries to guide you into specific answers he's looking for. And then he goes, aha, right? He gives a little trap thing that he does, right?
So is he like a creationist?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And his name is ironic more than anything.
Exactly.
Okay,
yes.
Got you.
Yes. He's quite the character. Let's see.
Maybe he'll come to Faithless Forum and then be grossly outnumbered, and then his stormtroopers, who are probably all keyboard warriors, will melt into the background, and he'll be left defenseless.
Yeah, for sure.
Who knows?
And I would agree with what Prophet of Zod here said too when we were talking about the live thing. Doing live things made you grow a ton. Yeah.
Well, that can be unfortunate from a health perspective. I would get that checked out, Prophet of Zod.
Oh man, geez, I'm saying you've got just as good as dad jokes as I've got. Yes, I agree with that as well. We'll post this one more thing, and then I think what we'll do is we'll jump into the after party. So if there's any of you guys that like to come in, because Lloyd can stick around for a little bit longer, and he'll answer any questions if you have them in the after party. So just give me a message on Twitter, and I will send you a link, because I'm gonna close this one down. I'll take a bit of a break because I can go grab some more beer and have a quick pee and a quick cigarette, and then I'll come back in. And
not simultaneously, I hope.
No.
Messy.
It could be, yes. Yeah. And I'm out of cleaning supplies, so
okay.
I got to head to Walmart and get some more. But all right, Lloyd, man, thank you so much for doing this with me today.
An absolute honor. Thank you for taking an interest, and I've enjoyed the view from the moon's surface.
Yes. We're looking at they look like little ants and stuff running around on Earth there. All right, so thanks guys for hanging out with us. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. I really enjoyed our conversation, man. It was I learned a little bit more than I had already previously consumed just talking from other XJWs. So
me too.
I always enjoy expanding my knowledge base. So thank you so much for doing this. And we'll see you at Faithless Forum for sure. And of course, we'll probably see you in the next 10 minutes in the after party. So we're going to do that soon. There should be, I don't know if I included the link to the after party in this. I don't think I did, actually. There are lots of links below where you can find Lloyd on Twitter, on YouTube. I also put his Patreon link there. I'm going to add a couple of more for his the survey link and his. You still have your blog too, correct? Right. So I'll add that as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So IQ, my moderator extraordinaire, if you could get on that and then send me the links in the messages on Twitter, and I'll add them to this after. And thank you guys. And then, like I always say at the end of these things, like the late great Christopher Hitchens once said, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.